Please help me give big smooches to my guest, Dr. Alfiee.
Thank you for having me. I love
Oh,
being here.
it is so good to have you here because
Thank you.
listen, we have questions. People are out here in these dating streets, Dr.
Ooh,
Alfiee.
child, in the
And
streets, girl.
yes, and they really need some of the guidance and help that you offer.
Okay.
And I'll just begin at the top because
Okay.
uh, we talk a lot about dating on the show.
Yeah.
We talk about the
Yeah.
logistics of dating,
Yeah.
but sometimes we don't get into the emotional aspects of dating and the therapeutic aspects of dating. I actually really believe that dating can teach you a lot about yourself. And I have a lot of my clients, I recommend that they continue to be in therapy while we work on their dating plans. What do you see coming up? I'm sure as a therapist, there are there are themes that you see emerging. What do you see as the biggest themes for people who are dating in in your role as a mental health professional?
I tend to be a little more meta than I am sort of micro, and I think at macro levels. And one of the things I think about that comes up a lot is we have these expectations of partners that I feel are often unfair and unrealistic. And I think related to that is we have these expectations of ourselves in dating relationships that I think we do ourselves a disservice. My mom used to talk about two halves in relationships don't make a whole. So you don't come into a relationship as half a person. And she used to always say, baby, I happen to be heterosexual, cisgender. You don't want half a man. That was my mom's thing. And so you want a whole man. And whoever you're dating, you want a whole partner. Whatever your orientation is, whoever you're attracted to, you want a whole partner. And so the idea is two whole partners come together to make a whole relationship. So I think it's those two things of the expectations we have of ourselves that I think are often unfair. And this idea, the one, I know you hear it all the time. I hear it a lot. I can change that person.
What makes us want to change somebody else? I feel like it must be something deeper than just like we have this like fix it mentality. And I'm somebody who I'm in a happy monogamous marriage for almost 18 years actually
Ooh,
myself.
congratulations.
Hey, thank you. But before, girl, it was a mess.
But you got married at 10 though. But you was 10 years old when you got married, right?
Bless
Because
you,
girl,
bless you,
you too
bless
young
you.
to have been married for 18 years.
Bless you. I was definitely not 10. I'm not gonna say how old I was. However, because I can't have people doing math on me. But what I will say is that before I realized I had a pattern of dating people who were unavailable and just what you said, Dr. Alfie, who I was like, well, these things aren't quite working or they're not really at where they want to be in their life, and I can fix them. I can fix this.
Yes, yeah, Imma tell you who taught me about that, and I have never forgotten it. It was brilliant. This was in the early '90s. Iyanla Vanzant, not her personally, but reading her books, and I remember this one thing that I read, and it blew me away, and what I read was seeing potential in a partner means that that partner is not doing everything they're supposed to be doing right now, and I was like, "Wait, that's right." I think part of the challenge is we are sold a fantasy about what relationships look like. You know that better than anybody. We're just
Wrote a
sold a
book called F
fantasy.
the Fairy Tale.
There,
Yeah.
there you go. That's it
Yeah,
right
it's
there.
the
That's it
fantasy.
right there. This happened to me too. We get caught up in this idea of either that I can fix him or her or them, or we get caught up in it's supposed to instantly be what like you talk about in your book, a fairy tale. It's like instant, like you see each other, and sometimes that happens. You see somebody and you know that's my person. I don't know how often that happens. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
think you still have to build a relationship even after you see him and say, "Ooh, I think that's my person."
Yeah, and I think a lot of people make the ending of the story fit the beginning because it's gonna work out with somebody. Like, I wanna give some hope to everyone listening too. If you want a relationship and you're willing to become the best partner yourself, you will find somebody who is at the right place and is the right person for you. But this idea of like love at first sight and I just knew it was my person. I could tell you, Dr. Alvey, I could tell you probably like half a dozen, maybe a dozen times where I was like, "Yes, this is my person," and it didn't work out. But
Yeah.
then when it does work out, then sometimes we tell the beginning of the story differently and think that we knew, but we didn't know. We had to go
Mm-mm.
through the steps, like you just said. We had to really do the I don't even like to use the word work when it comes to relationships,
But it
do the work.
is. But it
It's
is. What's wrong
it's
with the word work?
because I think people feel like that is something they don't wanna do, like,
Ah,
it's drudgery, it's like it's
got it. How
hard.
about effort? Is it
Effort.
effort? Because that's
Yes,
what you're
I
trying to
will
do.
bu
You're putting in effort
yeah,
to
it
find
does take
alignment.
effort. It
Yeah.
absolutely takes effort, and it takes consciousness
Ooh,
and awareness, right?
child. Yep.
Because you gotta we all come to a relationship with our stuff.
Yep.
And sometimes it's a little handbag and sometimes it's a big old suitcase,
Yes.
but we have to be willing to unpack that stuff or we can't be our whole self in a relationship. So
No.
let's
And
talk about
absolutely.
that. How do we unpack
How do
that?
you find your person? How do you pick your route? Let me say it like that. How do you pick your route? ROUTE, if you don't know what the destination is? How do you pick it?
Wow. That's so
Right?
profound. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
So it's the idea of when you're going on a trip. Okay, I'm not talking about back in the day. I'm talking about now. You might have Apple Maps, Google Maps, whatever you're going to use, right? Waze, whatever. You put the destination in there and you get a route. But the other things that you
Mhm.
need are the vehicle, whatever that vehicle is going to be. It can be a bike, it could be a scooter, it could be a car, whatever the case may be, motorcycle. You need yourself on the journey and you need to know where you're going. I think we skip those first 2 parts. I think we look at the destination and we just say, "Get me there."
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really liking this analogy. I can see the map, and I can also see that the map has you get like the fastest route, but then you also get you could go the freeway or you could
That's
go
it.
surface streets. You have
That's
different
right.
options. So I love talking about what we're doing is really providing this vehicle here for folks. So I know there's a lot of talk out there about attachment styles right now.
Yeah.
And I actually talked in my book about how I think used in the wrong way,
Yep.
in the wrong hands, it
Yep.
actually could be really detrimental to
Yep.
not only you but also the person that you're dating.
I agree.
I'm glad I'm getting a cosign from you because I'm
Yep.
talking to a mental health professional, and I said caveat I'm not a mental health professional. I am a dating and relationship coach specifically, but
Yes.
I want to understand from your perspective how attachment styles do impact relationships and how we can use that information about your own attachment style or the person that you're meeting better to move into healthier, more successful relationships.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the literature, I'm always very honest about my feelings about the literature that's out there. I think we start with this concept of the literature often was not grounded in people who look like me and you. Right? So I think
Okay.
there's value. There's absolutely value because it's a conceptual framework that helps us make sense of the world. I also think we want to put in context that there's some aspects of it that we have to be mindful of as people of color, people with diverse backgrounds, whatever that background is. So when I think about attachment styles, it really just helps us make sense of how do we relate, what are our connections, and how do we operationalize those connections with the other people in our lives. And if you don't understand what your own attachment style is, I think it's like with anything in interpersonal relationships. How then do you know how to communicate to someone what you need? How do you know how to receive from another person what they need? Are you able to hear it? And so again, the grounding force in terms of this idea of attachment styles is this really just helping you make sense of what is my relationship to myself? What is my relationship to this person I'm dating? Also, what is my relationship to the other people who are also part of your relationship, even if it's indirect, right? So, if you think about what your attachment style is, it may have an impact on how you choose to communicate, what information you choose to communicate, who that information about your relationship gets communicated to, right? Because again, there are people around you who are also part of that relationship. We all have our best girlfriend, best guy friend, sibling. For some of us, it's a parent, auntie, uncle. who you're communicating information to about your relationship so they can give you advice or they can give you support, you know what I mean? Or they can help get your mind right. Um, all of those things are important things to consider in the context of attachment styles. And then here's the piece where I think diversity, equity, inclusion, cultural differences come in. The way that we think about attachment styles may have to shift depending on our cultural background, right? Because for some cultures, I'm not going to say which, there's the idea of we are all a collective. It's like I am because we are. In other cultures, it's I am because I am. It don't have nothing to do with the rest of y'all. And so if you think about how you're reared, how you build friendships, how you make determinations about interpersonal relationships from that cultural lens as well, that has an impact on how you form, maintain, shift, or manage attachments. Am I answering your question?
Oh, well, you're answering my question, but then you're raising me several other questions because this is I you're explaining something that I've been feeling for a long time because I was like, I don't know that I relate to this. And also a lot of the research was done at a time when
Mhm.
mothers were the primary caregiver.
Mhm.
And uh, full disclosure, I grew up in a very traditional household where my
Mhm.
mother was the stay-at-home parent and my dad
Mhm.
worked, and even so, I was like,
Mhm.
"Wait, how is my relationship with my father not a part of this equation?"
Mhm.
And also, it never quite added up.
Mhm.
And when you're giving, and I come from a dual cultural background
Mhm.
too. My
Mhm.
mom is Black, my dad is Jewish,
Mhm.
and it's interesting to me because when I read, like, what the clinical
Mhm.
source was for certain attachment styles, it
Mhm.
did not line up with my own
Mhm.
experience and how I saw myself showing up in
Mhm.
relationships.
Mhm.
So this is you're blowing my mind right now. Um, and I really also am grappling for my clients with this idea of, like, everybody is just like secure attachment or nothing,
That's
right?
it.
Like we could just get to
That's
if
it.
everybody could just get to secure attachment. But what you're saying, Dr. Alfie, what I think I'm hearing you say is that we are ourselves. And we started this conversation with we're not changing ourselves or other people, right?
That's it.
We're just becoming the best version of ourselves. And
Correct.
so I feel like I don't want people to carry around shame if they're like, "Oh, I have an anxious attachment or I have an avoidant attachment," or any of we've kind of focused in on those
Correct.
few, but there's so many more
Correct.
nuances to this, right?
Correct.
If you're not trying to push that away, you're
Correct.
saying, "I'm bringing this to the party and this is how
Correct.
we work with it." Right?
Yes. Yes, and it's
Whoa!
yes, that's it. And it also is I always tell people, we're fed this idea of perfection versus imperfection. And I don't believe that. I feel like it's a continuum. And I feel like as we grow and mature, I always want people to know something that you just said. You're growing into a better and better and more perfect version of you. There's no ruler that you're supposed to be comparing yourself against. It's what's best for you. So when we think about attachment styles, I think we should also be thinking about what's adaptive from my background and my culture and what's maladaptive. I think if you can think about it in terms of what works for me that allows me to feel healthy versus what doesn't, I think that makes it a little easier, right? So think about it like this. If we think about it's like secure and then everything else is bad, right? So if one of the attachment styles is avoidant, do we ever stop to think as a person of color, in your case as a multiracial person, are there circumstances under which that I'm attached to this person but kind of not, right? You know what I mean? Like I kind of have to not be too close to this person because I'll tell you one quick example from our data from my nonprofit. We looked at multiracial young people and other racial ethnic groups. But for the multiracial young people, one of their sources of racial trauma was family members. So think about that. If you're with a certain part of the family and they're not always the nicest, or maybe there's that one aunt or uncle who just can't get their mind right, right? Then you love them, but you need distance from them. And so how does attachment style interpret that? It may be safety for you to be close, but not too close. It's like sort of that approach, avoid type of thing. But we're taught that that's 100% bad. So I think, again, it comes back to what I want people to take from it. It's okay to have that as a framework. Put it in context. Maladaptive for me versus adaptive for me. And I think if we can think about it in that sense, we may find that we have bits and pieces of a lot of those attachment styles. But what's going to be healthiest for me and healthiest for me in relationship to this other person that I'm dating?
Seriously, Dr. Alfie, this may be the most profound thing that has ever been said on Dates and Mates. Like I'm literally you are like speaking directly to me. I am like almost about to like tear up here
Do a tear up,
because
girl.
because you're really speaking to my experience of like I am very aware before my husband I had an avoidant attachment style, but like I came from a household with a lot of love and a lot of support and positive relationships with my parents, and I was like, where does this come from? It's because it's not just from the parents, it's from the whole community.
That, yes, ma'am.
It's the extended family, it's the whole
Yes.
community, it's the
Yes.
teachers, it's
Yes.
everyone that shaped you
Yes.
when you were young and how that relates to the way that you feel in a relationship. Like,
Yes.
girl, you're absolutely blowing my mind, and I hope our listeners can connect to this as much as I am right now, and I know you have so many more tools on your website, and we'll tell everybody how to get to the AAKOMA Project and dralfie.com. But I'm just honestly blown away by having this new way of looking at attachment styles and really empowering people
Yes.
to, like you said, understand their
Yes.
framework and how it shows
Yes.
up in relationship. And I'd like to get a little deeper here, Dr. Alfie, because it actually reminds me of some dating experiences from my past. But before we get into that, I got to tell you all about something else. Thank you, lovers, for supporting Dates and Mates and our sponsors. Now, let's get a little deeper here, Dr. Alfie, because I've
Yes.
also had partners in the past who have, I don't know, can I use the word triggered? Is that a therapy
Yeah,
word? Am I
that's
doing
fine.
therapy
That's fine.
speak? I'm like, I don't know, can I use it?
Yeah.
But, who sort of triggered different parts of my
Yes.
story
Yes.
and different elements of my attachment style.
Yes.
And, and what you just said, adaptive or maladaptive, like, how did that then make me feel in the relationship? And how who did that make me become in the
Yes.
relationship?
Yes.
Wow, this is profound. Okay. There's another aspect of mental health that I want to bring into this conversation because I've actually gotten this question a few times before.
Okay.
You probably have the stats on this, Dr. Alfie, but like there's something like what 25% of the US population that is on some sort of, SSRI,
Yeah.
stabilizers,
Yes.
depression medication, anxiety medication.
Yes.
It's am I in the ballpark of the stat?
It
Something like that.
varies. You're in the ballpark. It depends on racial ethnic group, right? So when you think
Mhm.
about people of color across the board, with the exception of AAPI communities, other groups of people of color are far less likely to either be offered medication as a part of their treatment regimen or to take them. That's just not a thing that we do. So I do have some stats when I think about youth and young adults. So you thinking probably up to the age of 30. What our data tells us is that depending on the illness, anywhere from 5 to 15% of people will say that this is what they're telling you, right? We're not doing checking your medications. We're not asking for a medication. Show me the, but we're not doing that. We're just asking people tell us. Somewhere in the neighborhood of, I would say like 8 to maybe 15% across different groups of people of color will say, yes, I take meds. In the study that we did in 2023 for AAPI young people, I think ages 12 or 13 to 25, about 30% of those young people said they had been offered and took meds. Now, what you don't know, right? This is just a sample. What you don't know is how long they took them, which meds were they on? Do you know what I mean? What was it treating? We don't necessarily always know those things, but I think it is far less likely that among people of color, people are taking meds. It's not zero, right? It's
Yeah.
not nothing, but it's far less than I think what for some of our white family members or white brothers and sisters and other loved ones, we're less likely to take meds.
Yeah, and also just with the stigma in certain communities of even having mental health services, and what that means, I'm sure that impacts those numbers. But
Yes.
regardless,
Yes.
a lot of
Somebody's
people
taking them.
are
Yes.
and a lot of people, whether you are on medication or not,
Yeah.
a lot of people are feeling anxious, depressed,
Yes. Whew.
burnout,
Yes.
frustrated,
Yes.
overwhelmed, discouraged. I could go on. I can go on.
Yeah.
But I think everybody gets the point. So I kind of want to speak to we've talked a little bit about handling your own attachment, your own mental health,
Mhm.
but a lot of people that you're going to meet in dating
Mhm.
are coming to the table with different mental health challenges that they're
Correct.
working through.
Correct.
What do you recommend for daters? Like, where is the line?
Yeah.
Because I've gotten this question before where somebody was like, I just found out that my boyfriend is bipolar.
Yes.
I just found out that this person that I went on a date with is taking antidepressants. Is
Mhm.
this a big deal? Is the
Mhm.
other a big deal?
Mhm.
Where is that line, and how can you figure out for you? How can you figure out like what is I guess I would say like what is a deal breaker? What is an intolerable
Yeah.
risk? And what is just a fact of living in the world today?
Yeah. Couple things. One is if you've been dating someone for a while and they feel comfortable enough with you to open up and share with you that they are taking medication or they are in therapy, that should not be a deal breaker because you've established enough of a relationship and enough trust in that relationship that they feel comfortable telling you. So to me, that should never be a deal breaker. If they're saying it to you on the first or second date, I think we have to think about, is this something I feel equipped to go on a journey, whatever the journey is? You don't know what the journey is going to be. The journey might be one or two more dates and you're done. The journey might be you going to marry this person. You don't know, a long-term partnership or cohabitate or whatever the case may be. I think then it comes back to what we talked about in the beginning. I am very much a proponent of, you have to know yourself. Do you know whether or not you're capable of being with someone who might be struggling with or managing? I mean, they might not even be struggling, they're just managing it, a mental illness. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves. For some of us, it's just the thought. When I hear, I'm like, oh, child, no, I can't be bothered with that. For other people, it's like, okay, that's just like telling me, I don't know, your favorite flavor of toothpaste, or you know what I mean, like your favorite food. It's just something else I'm learning about you. But I think what should never happen is the stigma of that is associated with mental illness, particularly in our communities. I hope is never the thing that prevents someone from moving forward. So the deal breaker again comes back to adaptiveness versus maladaptive in the context of the relationship. What am
Mhm.
I witnessing about this person? Does this person seem stable and functional? Okay, then we're good. It doesn't matter what they have. Or is it something where they're not managing it well? It's causing issues in our relationship. Then you got to have a conversation. Doesn't mean turn tail and run. It just means you have to be more thoughtful. But the stigma alone, the announcement alone, personally, I feel should never be the thing that sends you away from a person who's dealing with a mental illness.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I do feel like the attitudes have been changing. When I was working with OkCupid in 2022, we did one of our surveys. We what or among among our matching questions, we asked people about their thoughts about therapy, and at that time, 61% of respondents said therapy is good for people, 33% said it's necessary,
Ooh.
and only 5% said they didn't think it was for them. Interestingly, there was a drop in the mentions of mental health and therapy in profiles between 2021, if you remember what that world was like at that
Mhm.
point, and
Mhm.
2022. So, I don't have the current stats on that, but
Mhm.
I do see that there is at least more, willingness to accept that mental health is a part of relationships, and also that um, people who are in therapy sometimes are able to grow with you in that experience. We were talking about relationships being the vehicle to make you the best version of yourself, and that that people want somebody who's in therapy now because they have that awareness. So
Yeah, I
glad to see
wonder
that
if there are
changing.
generational differences. I happen to be Gen X, and so, Gen Xers are anywhere from, like, 45 to, like, 60. Like, the cutoff is, like, and there are no hard and fast numbers. But I think for people under 50, I would say, yep, they are 100% all in on everybody need to be in therapy. You need to get you a therapist, right? That old meme that's going around, people in therapy, something like are trying to heal because other people in their lives need to be in therapy and won't go. So but I also think
Also
there's something
relate.
right? I think there's something to be said for just openness. But to me, the openness to someone who might be in psychotherapy, to me, is akin to the openness that you have to any number of things about that person. So that should never be the thing that makes you say, I don't want to date this person. And if it is, then I feel like we ourselves have to do some soul searching because that should never be a reason to me, to not date somebody because they're in therapy. A lot of us need to be in therapy and are not.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. So, sometimes the stuff that we bring to the table is more intense
Yeah.
than other stuff. And I was doing a podcast interview
Mhm.
with somebody who had trauma
Mhm.
in her
Mhm.
history.
Mhm.
And she was like, "How do I move into a healthy relationship in spite of my trauma?" And I was like, first of all, not a mental health professional. Like, I can talk to you from the dating perspective,
Right.
but it made me really curious, Dr. Alfie, how that affects dating differently. Like I've heard um, one of our prior guests, Benjamin Cameras, did a post about this where,
Okay.
people with sexual trauma, people
Mhm.
with abuse,
Mhm.
I always say like trust your gut, get into
Mhm.
your body and dating and how you feel.
Mhm.
And he's like, what if you can't trust how you feel
There you go.
in your body? So
Ugh.
how do people navigate that? Because I mean, I know everybody wants and deserves love and connection,
Yes.
and having trauma in your past should not be something that prevents you from having that, but it's also not something that can be brushed under the rug.
That's right. So, I would say one thing that's the overarching theme for me is I don't think we flourish in spite of the traumas that have happened to us. I think we flourish acknowledging and accepting that those traumas have happened. Right.
Wow.
And so the other analogy that I used to give patients all the time was imagine your trauma, right? Because I've experienced it too. I was in an emotionally abusive relationship for a few years. So the analogy is think about your trauma as like a book on a shelf. You have a shelf, right? And your trauma when it's like raw, it's like on the bottom shelf. It's easily accessible. It's always there. You stick your hand out and grab it, right? As you begin to heal and process and work on, put some effort into, find alignment with your healing, that book just moves up higher and higher on the shelves until it's kind of out of reach. Now it's still there, but you just not able to access it as quickly. But that takes effort. So if we're not willing to put in effort, then the trauma is going to guide us. There's healing out there. We can heal. So
Yeah.
healing just means I've shrunk that trauma to a degree that it is not driving the bus for me. I'm driving the bus. The trauma is just a passenger. But I think for so many of us, the trauma is driving, which makes it hard to be in relationships. So once we can acknowledge everybody's dealing with something, everybody's been through something. Once we can acknowledge that, then I think we can let go of some of the shame that comes from having experienced trauma. And when we can put down some of that shame, it puts us in a position to be open to healing, working on our healing, vulnerability in relationships, and giving us clarity of vision. But if we don't work on healing it, it's not fixed in a day, it's not fixed in an hour, it's not fixed in a week, it's not fixed in a month. If we fail to accept that it's something we want to put effort into, I think it always sort of is becomes a barrier for us. It's an impediment, and we don't need it to be an impediment. We want it to be a minor, minor, teeny tiny little, if anything, speed bump.
Wow. So, do you feel like do I need to reframe this idea of get into your body, get into the way you feel on a date? because I still think there's value.
Yeah.
I still think there's value in if you notice a pattern of any way that you are activated, I'll say it that way, that you're
Yep.
activated on a date. So
Yep.
whether it's like that, this is another reason where I'm like, no, love at first sight. No,
Right. Right.
that's you've been activated by that
Right.
person. And then if you can get curious and say, wait, where does that come from?
Yes.
Because sometimes we
Exactly.
think the butterflies are good. That means
Exactly.
that this is a match. But
Exactly.
there are cases where the butterflies are bad
Exactly.
and they're a
I think
sign, right, of their history.
yes, you're right. I don't think it's I think it's a matter of can you get most of that clarity on your own before you're on a date? But here's where it's problematic. How many of us want to be still, self included, right? Now I'm happily married now. My husband is I love him. He's wonderful. Dr. Richard is he's awesome. But how many of us are willing to get still long enough to feel what good butterflies versus bad butterflies feel like?
That
That
is the
means you
key.
gotta be still. And what does that mean? If you're still, what's gonna happen? The trauma gonna come up. And we don't want the trauma to come up, so we keep pedaling. So we never figure out, we never give ourselves the gift of being still and working at it long enough, efforting long enough to figure out what's the good butterflies versus what's the bad butterflies. And that's, I think, not always, but sometimes how we end up, self included, with a partner who you I'll tell you this quick story because it's so true. The butterfly thing. Long story short, the person was this was way, way, way back when I first started dating as a full on adult. The person was supposed to come pick me up at 8. They showed up at 11 p.m.
Ugh. No.
Right? And got angry because I said I wouldn't go. And I ended up continuing to date that person. Now, the butterflies told me when that person showed, I would never forget this, showed up. I was living in New York City at 11. Alfie, you better not go. And I didn't. But the other part of me was like, well, do I say something? Do I explain why? And the better part of me was like, yes, explain it. But what I got back, I got a letter in the mail. The first sentence was, I sincerely do not understand why you came off so combative like that.
There
Right.
and
So the
then you're like,
butterfly,
"You don't
right?
even understand
Right. So the
how the world
butterflies,
works then."
that's it. The butterflies are supposed to tell you, no, baby, that ain't it. But you know what I mean? And so if you don't get clear ahead of time, you end up with stuff like that, and then you still go out with that person afterward. When that should be telling you, child, stay a million miles away. So I think that's what a lot of us do. We don't get still long enough to sort of heal. And I can say it now because I have a lot of distance. I have like almost 30 years of distance from that. But at the time I didn't. So that I think that's the key. We got to get still or we got to do the work so we can understand how those triggers, how we need to read those triggers. And I think your friend was absolutely right. Sometimes you worry that you can't trust what your body's telling you, but you got to work on it until you get to a healthier place of being able to and willing to trust what your body is telling you.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, so last question on that. I know, I'm like, I know you
It's
have to
all
go, but
good.
I'm
It's
like,
all
I wanna keep
good.
talking to you. Last question on that. When do you disclose, like a traumatic event, it's something like what we were talking about, a sexual
Yeah.
trauma, a
Yeah.
physical abuse, something that is a major thing on the shelf,
Yeah.
regardless of how much time has passed?
Yes. I think I I hope I don't sound like a broken record to your viewers and your listeners. Part of it is how comfortable are you with that story for yourself? I don't think you should be sharing stories that you're not 99, 100% comfortable. You've managed them enough to trust somebody else with that. I don't care who it is, to trust anybody else with that kind of trauma. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you're unsure, think about it like this is again an analogy. If someone knocks on your door, most of us will look through the peephole before we let them in. Why are you looking through the peephole? Because you have to establish, is it safe for me to open this door? It's the same thing with opening your trauma up to somebody else. Are you safe enough for me to open up and share my trauma with you? That takes time. I don't think any of us knows that after the first date. I don't think any of us knows it after the second date. So over time, do you see enough in that person where you feel like you can share it with them? And once you've established that they are a trustworthy person, then I think it's okay. But what do? We don't take the time, myself included, we don't take the time to establish whether or not that person is trustworthy. We just, oh, I need to, because the wellness community is telling me I have to be comfortable with my trauma. And one of the ways of being comfortable is I got to put it out there. No, no, you got to work on it until you feel comfortable with it yourself, right? Me sharing the two things I shared about my own past, that's because it's been 30 years. And I've had 30 years to work and heal and work on it and get it all the way on the tip top, way in the back. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
again, it comes back to, are they trustworthy? Are you paying attention to how trustworthy they are? And is this somebody you feel safe sharing a critical, important part of yourself with?
That is so, so, so important because I feel like some people have had experiences where that information came out and one particular person or maybe two particular people were not safe or couldn't hold that. Like sometimes people can't hold your stuff because their hands are already full and that cause relationships to end.
Yes.
And so they think
Yes.
I'm just going to say this as a disclaimer, as a disclosure.
Yes.
Like if I just put this out there and then they already know it and then they're like, "Oh, well, I'll still date you anyway. It's cool." The it doesn't
That's
mean
not
that
the
they are a
litmus
safe
test.
person,
That's
right?
it. That's not your litmus test. Your litmus test is, how do you feel? Because think about it like this. You are entrusting that other person with too much power. I'm going to put it out here and I'm going to see how they respond. They're driving the bus. You drive your own bus. You have to be in control of your own emotions, or not in control. That's the wrong word. You want to be the guardian of your own emotions, your own self, your own soul, your own spirit. You don't give that to somebody else to see if they're worthy to be the guardian. It's not with your stuff, with your deepest stuff. You put them through the paces in other ways. And it's not, go do this obstacle course before you can get with me. It's more, let me just pay attention to how you behave. How do you behave with other people in your life? How do you respond to my texts? Do you know what I mean? Do you respond to my text? Is everything DM? Do you know what I mean? On one of these apps? Like, what is it? So it's gathering enough information. Again, just like think about it as peeking through the peephole to see if you should let that person in. We have to do the same thing in our relationships.
100%. 100%. Oh, you've given us so much amazing food for thought. You pulled out a couple tears. My mascara is still intact, but this was amazing. Before you go, we're wrapping up every interview this season with one final thing.
Okay.
What is your most unpopular opinion about dating and relationships?
It's not easy, right? And people want you to think, oh, you just do this thing, you just do that thing, and you got it. I think that is my most probably unpopular. And then there's a second one. The second most unpopular is, you don't have to do any work on yourself to be in a relationship.
Mm-mm, we heard it here today. You got to do the work, but you're a living testament to how doing the work can create that roadmap, can create the vehicle and the journey to get to a place where you can have a successful, happy relationship. So thank you for
Hallelujah.
giving us guidance and tips and also hope for that for everyone here listening. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Alfie.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.